The Oregon Ducks became instant contenders in the Big Ten on the gridiron. Can they do the same on the hardwood?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Tuesday and welcome in to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host today, Andy Patton, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. You can find us ad-free on Amazon Music if you have not done so yet. Special shout out to those of you who are everyday listeners and those of you who have hung out with us in our Discord channel. If you haven't joined us yet, it is free to join. Link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. You can come hang out talking college hoops all the time. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet on FanDuel, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, folks, rumors flew around like crazy on Monday. We heard rumors that Gonzaga was going to join the Pac-12. It was quickly refuted that has not happened as of this recording. We saw that Memphis, Tulane, and South Florida have opted not to join the Pac-12 and instead are staying in the American Athletic Conference. The Pac-12 did extend an invitation to Utah State, which has been accepted. Reportedly, also UNLV is planning to stay in the Mountain West. It was a chaotic day of various movements and lack of movements in the conference realignment space. And instead of going over that today, we're going to continue our team preview series. We're going to kind of wait till the dust settles on some of that stuff. We'll certainly talk about what Utah State joining the new look Pac-12 means. And once we find out if this Gonzaga smoke is real, if they are going to join the Pac-12, we'll, of course, have more conversations about that. But instead of talking about the current Pac-12, we want to start to talk about a team from the previous iteration of the Pac-12, the Oregon Ducks, as we continue our team preview series. For those who have not been keeping track, we have now done quite a few of these episodes, fully going over every team that we expect to be in or around the top 25 this next season. We've talked about Kentucky and Kansas, Gonzaga, Alabama, Iowa State, Creighton, Baylor, both Duke and North Carolina, Houston and Marquette have all been covered. There's a playlist on our Locked On College Basketball YouTube if you want to go check out each and every one of these shows. We're talking about last season's results, the storylines from the previous year, as well as the off-season, the players added, the players departed, the starting lineup projections, and then the conference schedule, the non-conference slate, how we think the team's going to do in conference play, whether they're going to get a bid in the NCAA tournament, how they might do once they get there. Like we said, talking Dana Altman and the Oregon Ducks today. They went 24-12 in the final season of the Pac-12 last year, at least in the previous iteration of the Pac-12. There's not going to be a Pac-12 for the next 2 years as Oregon State and Washington State are in the WCC. But after that, we will, of course, have the conference back. The Ducks went 12-8 in the Pac-12 last year, finishing fourth in conference play. However, they rattled off 3 straight wins in the Pac-12 tournament, beat UCLA in the first round game, beat Arizona in the second game, who was ranked number 6 at the time, and then beat Colorado to secure a Pac-12 championship, one of multiple bid thieves that we saw last year. Duquesne was a bid thief out of the A-10. We had some other bid thieves as well, Oregon being chief among them. They earned an 11 seed in the Midwest region, had a first-round game against 6 seed South Carolina, a game they won 87-73, almost entirely because of Jermaine Couisnard, a former South Carolina player who had transferred to Oregon. He really wanted to show out against his former team and did that by hanging 40 on South Carolina in that game. You don't see a lot of 40-point games in the NCAA tournament. For a player to drop 40 against his former team and eliminate them in the big dance, it was one of the best stories in the first round of the NCAA tournament last year. And honestly, Oregon's second round game was one of the best games in the entire NCAA tournament as well. It was an 11-seeded Oregon taking on a 3-seed in Creighton. Dana Altman, former head coach at Creighton, was replaced by Greg McDermott when Altman came out to Oregon. So these two guys have a history together. Dana has his history with Creighton. And the final score of that game was 86-73, a 13-point win for Creighton. A good 3 seed against an up-and-coming 11 seed program like Oregon. You kind of expect a 10 to 15 point victory. Feels about right. So a 13-point win for Creighton, you don't think too much about that, except that this was a double overtime victory for Creighton. Tied at the end of regulation, tied at the end of the first overtime. Creighton then outscored Oregon 15-2 in the second overtime period to secure what appears to be a comfortable 13-point victory. Jermaine Couisnard and N'Faly Dante, Oregon's big man, combined for 60 of Oregon's 73 points. Basically did everything for the Ducks in this game. The rest of the team had just 13 points total. Jackson Shelstad had 7. Jadrian Tracy had 6. That was it. 4 players scored for the Ducks in a game where they took a 3-seeded Creighton to double overtime. Fantastic matchup last year. Speaking of N'Faly Dante, one of the big offseason storylines for the Ducks was his eligibility and his waiver. He had his appeal to have another year of eligibility denied by the NCAA. We're not seeing that all that much. The NCAA has been they haven't been too strict on this stuff because they haven't won when they've had cases go to court. And so I think they're just not in a position to be super strict, but they did shut down Dante's case. The waiver, like we said, was denied. The appeal was denied. He is no longer eligible. Dante did spend 5 years at Oregon. He only played 103 career games. There's a lot of players who had their eligibility, their waiver approved and were granted an additional year of eligibility who have played more than 103 career games while getting an extra year. So certainly there is an argument that Dante should have been granted an extra year. He played 12 games in the 2019-20 season. He only played 6 games in the 2020-21 season, but that was the COVID year where he was already granted an extra year of eligibility. I think that kind of threw off his ability to get some extra time. He was really, really good for the Ducks last year, so it is a huge, huge loss for Oregon that he is not eligible for this team this upcoming season. Dante averaged 17 points, 9.2 boards, and just under 2 blocks a game last year. A player who was very good throughout his career at Oregon, just was never healthy enough to put together a full season. He finally did it last year, and unfortunately doesn't get a chance to build on that momentum, at least not while as a member of the Oregon Ducks, who again are no longer in the Pac-12. They are joining the Big Ten alongside UCLA, alongside USC and Washington. Isaac and I spoke about the Big Ten's conference schedule, which was released over the weekend. We talked about it on Monday's episode of Locked On College Basketball, including how the Big Ten is handling the 4 West Coast schools. Every team in the Big Ten plays 3 games home and away against 3 different teams. All 4 of the West Coast schools are doing that against each other to kind of help make the travel a little bit easier, not only for those West Coast schools, but for the teams located out in the Midwest and even out on the East Coast in the Big Ten as it stretches all the way across the country. So we are seeing Oregon they're going to play Washington twice, they're going to play USC twice, UCLA twice, and only play the rest of the teams in the conference one time. A little bit of an advantage for Oregon, just in terms of getting familiar with the new arenas and new coaches and new play styles of the teams that they're going to face in conference play. This current Oregon squad's got a lot of young talent. They got a lot of injury issues that they've dealt with in the past, but there's a lot of young talent on this roster. And the main question now, we know they lose N'Faly Dante. We know they lose Jermaine Couisnard. Big, big losses for the Ducks. You don't need me to explain that. I just told you they scored 60 out of 73 points in Oregon's last game against Creighton. But this team has plenty of talent capable of stepping up. So how is that going to work? Who's going to step into the starting role? And how might Dana Altman divide the playing time? We're going to talk about all of that coming up here in just a second. Right after I tell you folks about 5-Hour Energy. Are you somebody who's been wanting to try to get in shape but having trouble staying motivated? Make 5-Hour Energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost that you need to get fit. We all know you sometimes just don't want to go to the gym. You got to take a 5-hour energy shot to get you the feeling and the alertness so you can get out to the gym and get your workout on. 5-Hour Energy is the brand that hardworking people like you have trusted for over 20 years to give them the alert, energized feel that they need to get through a busy, hectic day. You always know where to find 5-Hour Energy, right at the cash register at nearly every convenience, drug, and grocery store nationwide. You can stock up on money-saving multi-packs to make sure you never run out of delicious, energizing 5-Hour Energy shots. So go to 5hourenergy.com and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can even use our promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. That offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions, and the code is no good on subscription orders. So go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still listening to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we're still talking Oregon Ducks, Dana Altman's team. We're giving a full-on team preview here as this program transitions into the Big Ten. Like we said, they're competing on the football level right at the top of that conference. Can they do the same on the men's basketball side of things? We'll talk a little bit more about how we think they're going to do in the Big Ten this upcoming season to close out the show, but want to talk about what happened this offseason. We already talked about the fact that they were unable to get N'Faly Dante back for a 6th year of eligibility. The waiver was denied. He is not coming back in the picture. However, this team does have quite a few key returners who are coming back to Eugene for the next season. We got Jackson Shelstad, KJ Evans, and Mookie Cook. That is the place to start. 3 returners. All 3 of these players were high-profile freshmen in the 2023 recruiting class. I believe all of them were top 40 prospects in that class. Many of them were, or a couple of them were projected to potentially be one-and-done caliber players. Jackson Shelstad kind of strikes me more as a 4-year guy. We'll talk a little bit more about him. KJ Evans was the most likely to be a one-and-done and kind of looked at times during the year like he might be, but his role changed a little bit. Again, injuries were such a huge part of Oregon's season last year that he ultimately had to play more of a small ball 4 role than I think he was expecting to. And to his credit, he handled the role quite well and I think looked good in that spot, but I don't know that it showcased necessarily all of the NBA talent that he has. So he comes back to school. He didn't transfer, stays at Oregon, comes back, has an opportunity to play a bigger role now with Dante gone, with Couisnard gone, and should be one of, if not the best player, highest scorer on this Oregon team. And then you got Mookie Cook. Cook was another top 20 prospect in that class. He only played 5 games last year, dealt with serious injury issues throughout the year. We don't really know a whole lot about who Mookie Cook is. He's a high-level athlete, but does that stand? Does he stay at that level after dealing with an injury for most of last year? Is the athleticism capped in any way? How does that alter his potential ceiling? There's a lot of question marks at this point about Mookie Cook. If he is the guy that he was coming out of high school, this could be a huge addition in quotation marks for the Ducks as somebody who played very little last year. Other returners for Oregon, Nate Biddle comes back. Feels like he's been there for a long time. He, spoiler alert, has also dealt with injury issues, only played 5 games last year for the Ducks. They're going to likely be their starting center, or at least a key part of that front court. Jadrian Tracy comes back. He started 22 games for the Ducks last year. Keyshawn Barthelemy is back as well. Colorado transfer, played 18 games last year for the Ducks because he, drum roll please, dealt with injuries last year. Very talented player when he is healthy. James Cooper and Andre Warren are also back, as well as guys who weren't big-time contributors for this team, but are both back in the mix. Looking ahead at the additions for Dana Altman and the Ducks, 4 key players coming in the transfer portal from the Division I level. You get Supreme Cook, one of the better names in college basketball. Cook transfers from Georgetown. He is a 6'9" big, productive player, definitely a back to the basket type big, not a floor spacer by any stretch. Not as good as N'Faly Dante, but the best big that the Ducks were able to find. They were kind of waiting late into the offseason to find out if Dante would get that eligibility. When he did not, they kind of had to scramble a little bit to fill out the front court. Supreme Cook is certainly not a bad option for them to pick out of. The team also lands TJ Bamba in the transfer portal. Bamba transfers from Villanova, started his career at Washington State, went across the country to Philadelphia to play for the Wildcats, now comes all the way back to Eugene to play for the Ducks. High scoring guard, very good outside shooter. Nice addition for Dana Altman. Team also gets Raheem Moss, a guard from Toledo, averaged 15.5 points, 5.5 boards, 3 assists and just under 2 steals per game last year. Probably not quite as good as Ray J. Dennis, the guard who transferred from Toledo to Baylor last year, but Moss has somewhat similar numbers to what what Dennis put up at Baylor. So could be a nice addition for this Ducks team as well. They also get Brandon Angel, transfer from Stanford, which now looks like an ACC to Big Ten transfer, despite being an intra-conference transfer at the time. Angel's a 6'8" forward from Stanford, 13 points, 5 boards last year, shot just under 45% from 3. Not a super high volume shooter, but to have a big who can space the floor like that is always very valuable. Those are the 4 main additions for the Ducks in the transfer portal. They do have one high-profile freshman coming in. That's Jamari Phillips, former Arizona committee, decommitted from Arizona and ended up committing to join the Ducks. It's a 4-star shooting guard, 60th ranked prospect in the 2024 class. A couple other additions for the Ducks. Desrick Lindsay is a forward from the junior college level who comes in. Jason Williams-Johnson is a guard from the Division III level coming up to Oregon. And then Drew Carter, who actually was a football player at Colorado, then transferred to UC Davis, played a little bit on the basketball team for Davis last year, and now comes to Oregon. I don't believe that he's on the football roster, although I'm not 100% sure about that. I do know he's on the basketball roster after having played, I think, 3 or 4 games for UC Davis last year. Departures, we talked about the key ones. N'Faly Dante gone, Jermaine Couisnard gone. Those are the 2 big losses. Brennan Rigsby and Kario Akendo were 2 guards who hit the transfer portal. Both were key pieces last year as kind of depth options. I think Rigsby started 20-something games last year, but he was thrust into a starting role because of injuries. He was more of a 6th, 7th man for them. He transfers to Minnesota. So again, that now is a conference transfer as Oregon and Minnesota are both in the Big Ten. Okendo transferred to SMU, where he will play for former USC head coach Andy Enfield. The Ducks also lost Mamadou Diarra to graduation. Jesse Zarzula is gone, and Gabe Reichel as well. So lots of guys out the door, lots of guys coming in. It's going to be a new look team for the Ducks, but I think the main kind of the ceiling for this Oregon team is going to be dictated by how the returners, namely Shelstad, Evans, and Cook, how those guys look this upcoming season. And I think we're expecting to see a lot of the newcomers kind of sprinkled into this starting lineup as well. It's going to be really interesting. I see a whole bunch of different ways that Dane Altman could present this starting lineup. Honestly, I had a hard time projecting how I think this might go. The ones that I feel the most secure about, Jackson Shelstad's going to start the 1. There's just not any debate about that. He played 33 minutes a game last year as a true freshman, 13 points a game, about 3 assists, about 3 boards. He is your starting point guard. You book it. I think TJ Bamba is going to start too. It'd be pretty surprising to land a high-profile transfer like Bamba from Villanova, double-digit scorer at Wazoo, quality scorer at Villanova. You don't bring him in to not start him. So I think Shelstad and Bamba, I feel pretty confident that those 2 guys are in your starting lineup. Outside of that, I see a lot of different options. I think Brandon Angel probably starts. He's either your small ball 4, maybe he plays the 3. I think Kwame Evans or KJ Evans starts as well. Again, I think he could be kind of the breakout star for this Oregon squad after playing a productive performance last year, averaged about 7.5 points, 5 boards as a true freshman, playing kind of slightly out of position. I expect to see him have a really strong sophomore year. So Shelstad, Bamba, Brandon Angel, KJ Evans, and then Nate Biddle. Again, Biddle only played 5 games last year, but if he is healthy, he is your starting center for this team. So that's my projected starting 5. But if you told me that 3 of those guys start or 2 of those guys start, I believe you, because Supreme Cook could easily be the starter instead of Nate Biddle at the 5. He could maybe even start at the 4, although I don't think you start Biddle and Cook together necessarily. Mookie Cook, the other Cook, they're not related to each other. Mookie Cook, if he's healthy, again, only played 5 games last year, but if he's healthy, he was a top 20 freshman in that class last year, high-level athlete, 6'8", really, really good athletic player. He could work his way into the starting lineup. I doubt he starts on day 1, but he could be somebody who starts in time. Jadrian Tracy started 22 games, I believe, for the Ducks last year, and I have him coming off the bench. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he started in place of either Angel or Evans. That Evans and Angel are both kind of 6'7", 6'8", small ball fours. So I think it's possible the Ducks go with a 3-guard lineup, start Tracy instead of one of those two guys and have them come off the bench. And then you have Raheem Moss. We talked about him, a guard from Toledo who averaged 15.5 points a game last year. Real chance that he ends up starting. And Keyshawn Barthelemy, who started 6 games last year, was a starter at Colorado prior to transferring to Oregon. He could be in that mix as well. That's 10 guys that we've talked about so far. That does not even include Jamari Phillips, the 4-star freshman guard, who could play his way into a bigger role. It also doesn't include the JUCO transfer and the D3 transfer, Jason Williams-Johnson and Drew Carter as well. Lots of depth on this Oregon roster. I'm not sure there's a lot of high-powered, like high-profile star power. You know, this isn't a team that has a ton of star power, but it has a lot of depth. And it gives Dana Altman a lot of options to either switch up his starting lineup throughout the season or to potentially play a lot. You can play some really big lineups where you have Biddle and Evans and Angel and maybe like Mookie Cook all on the floor at the same time. And you have a bunch of 6'7", 6'8" guys. You can play some very small lineups. There's a lot of different options that Dana Altman will be able to play with next year in the Big Ten. Obviously, health is a huge factor for this team. We talked about it. Biddle played 5 games last year. Barthelemy played 18 games last year. Mookie Cook only played 5 games last year. There's a couple guys who are not in the program anymore, like Dante, like Rigsby, like Zarzello, who also missed significant time last year as well. So they got to find a way to stay healthy. It's probably part of the reason that this team has 11 or 12 players who are capable of contributing, because Dana Altman's tired of having to run out of depth and not have guys that can step up and play for him on the court. We talked briefly about Jackson Shelstad, really talented player. He reminds me a lot of Peyton Pritchard, both guys who are from Wesleyan High School, both guys who won state championships in Oregon at Wesleyan High School, both guys who transferred or who started their college career at Oregon. Peyton Pritchard played all 4 years there, went into the NBA, is now with the Boston Celtics, very key part of their championship run. Jackson Shelstad looks like he's going to do kind of the same stuff. Starter right away as a freshman, hit a game-winning shot early in his career. There's a lot of similarities between Shelstad and Peyton Pritchard. He's a player that if you haven't paid attention to him yet, especially if you're a Big Ten fan who hasn't watched a lot of Oregon basketball, get ready to watch Jackson Shelstad because he is a lot of fun. Well, speaking of the Big Ten, how's Oregon going to do? You got an 18-team conference now. You got some of your old buddies coming with you from the Pac-12, but is this Oregon team going to do enough to compete for a top spot in the Big Ten Conference? And can they get themselves back to the big dance? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page you use to place your bets. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel. And look, if you're a believer, if you think Oregon is going to be the team that does it, the team that breaks a 24-year streak of Big Ten programs not winning the NCAA tournament, doing it in the first year after they are not in the Pac-12, which has a streak dating back to 1997 of not winning the national championship. If you think Oregon's ready to break those records, well, FanDuel's got them at plus 6,500 to win the 2025 national championship. That means your $5 bet not only gets you $200 in bonus bets, but if you're right and they win, you get $325 in cash money. So, folks, head to FanDuel.com now. All right, folks, closing out the show today, continuing our team preview episode talking about the Oregon Ducks. Dana Altman's club joins the Big Ten for the first time, coming off a year where they made the second round of the NCAA tournament as an 11 seed. We're going to talk about their non-conference schedule. Then we're going to talk about how we think they're going to do in the Big Ten, whether they're going to get a bid in the NCAA tournament, how they might do if and when they get to the big dance. Let's talk non-conference schedule at home. The Oregon Ducks will host UC Riverside, Montana, Portland from just up by 5, Troy, Stephen F. Austin, and Weber State. Kind of the general expectation for Big Ten, Big 12, high major programs. This is the kind of home schedule that you expect. Mostly teams that they're expected to beat, not all complete pushovers. You know, Portland's coming out of the WCC, a decent conference there. Weber State has been good in the past. So we'll see. I think Oregon is expected to win all these games. They should win all these games, but it's not as bad as some of the other schedules that we've seen. The Ducks only have one true road game in the non-conference slate. That is up the road in Corvallis against the Oregon State Beavers, continuing that rivalry despite not being in the same conference anymore. Neutral site, you have the 3 games in the Players Era Festival. Oregon is one of the teams joining this festival. Again, as a reminder, it's in Las Vegas this year. It's taking place over Feast Week. It is an NIL event where the teams are being reportedly paid $1 million in NIL money, just to participate in the event. The winning team will get an extra $1 million as well. Oregon will play Texas A&M, San Diego State, and Creighton, a rematch of that second round game. And again, Dana Altman's old school. Those games are, I believe, November 26th, 27th, and 30th. As we've seen that kind of wonky schedule for that Players Era Festival. That's obviously a tremendous trio of games for the Ducks. Really elevates the strength of their non-conference schedule. We play an SEC team, a Big East team, and a very, very good Mountain West team, future Pac-12 team in San Diego State. The other neutral site game for the Ducks is against Stanford. That game is in San Jose. So neutral site, but obviously kind of one of those pseudo-neutral site games where it's really in favor of Stanford being played in San Jose, which is a lot closer to Palo Alto than it is to Eugene. I don't hate this non-conference schedule for the Ducks. Again, it's being heavily carried by the Players Era Festival, but a lot of teams have their MTEs carry their non-conference schedule. That's not surprising to see that happen. So I think this is a schedule that sets the Ducks up nicely as they get into Big Ten conference play. And how they do in the Big Ten, it really depends on the key thing that's plagued this team the last year or two, health. You got to stay healthy. The health of this team and the performance of Jackson Shelstad is what is going to determine whether the Ducks are a legitimate player in the Big Ten Conference this upcoming season, or if they just kind of float around the middle of the conference, float on the bubble, and aren't really a particularly impactful program in year one. Because I could see that reality. It wouldn't shock me if the Ducks are perennially, or not perennially, but next year are in the 8, 9, 10 to 12 range in the standings, where they're popping up on the bubble every time they pick up a big win, but then they fall off the bubble because they lose to somebody like that. That is a very realistic reality for the Ducks. And you might be thinking, why are we doing a team preview for a team that you expect to be on the bubble? Because there's also a reality where that's not the case, where they do stay healthy. Mookie Cook and KJ Evans play 30-plus games this year. Jackson Shelstad, who was fantastic as a freshman, takes that leap and is a 14, 15 point per game scorer. He's a better distributor, 4.5, 5 assists per game, more efficient scorer. Nate Biddle stays healthy in the front court. Again, only 5 games last year. He's a very quality big man, a decent defender, can space the floor as well. If he's healthy, if KJ Evans takes the leap as a sophomore, if Mookie Cook is healthy, again, you don't necessarily need every single one of these things to happen. But if the majority of them do, this is going to be a really good Oregon team. They have the depth. Again, I'm not sure they have the star power. Shelstad or Evans needs to just be that dude. They need somebody to be that dude. I like TJ Bamba. He's not that dude. If TJ Bamba is your leading scorer and your go-to offensive player, your ceiling is capped. And it's capped at a spot that I think Oregon has higher aspirations than. But if Bamba's your third, even fourth scorer, he could even be your second scorer. But if Shelstad's your guy and Evans is your guy and Bamba's kind of in that mix as well, now you're talking about a team that can really contend. Now you're talking about a team that finishes in the 4 to 7 range in the Big Ten. Right now, I think I comfortably project Purdue, Illinois, Michigan State, Indiana, and UCLA as your top 5. You can mix the order around. Certainly, there are people who are going to have Ohio State in that conversation. That's very justified. Michigan's going to be in that conversation. Rutgers is going to be in that conversation. That's 8 right there, and we haven't talked about Oregon. So could Oregon finish 9th? Absolutely. Absolutely, Oregon could finish 9th. USC might beat them. They could finish 10th. But I think Oregon ends up in that 5, 6, 7 range. I think they're right in that conversation. I think their sophomores pop, they can be better than Rutgers, who's relying really heavily on 2 freshmen. I'm not super sold on UCLA yet. There's a lot of talent on that roster, and I think the guards who struggled last year, Dylan Andrews and Sebastian Mack, are going to play better for Mick Cronin this year, but I'm not sold. I've been on record as being not super sold about Indiana yet either. A lot of talent on that roster, not sure how all the pieces fit together. There's a lot of question marks in the Big Ten right now. Oregon, yeah, they got questions too, a lot of them. But if the chips fall where they will for Oregon, if they fall in the right direction, this Ducks team can absolutely finish 5th, 6th. And if they're 5, 6, 7 in the Big Ten, they're not only making the NCAA tournament, they're probably getting a single-digit seed. I think the likeliest outcome for the Ducks is an outcome that not a lot of teams really strive for or want necessarily, but it feels to me like Oregon's going to finish somewhere in the Big Ten in that 5, 6, 8 range, somewhere in there, and that's going to net them a dreaded 8, 9 seed, maybe a 7 seed if in the best case scenario. I think maybe get up to a 6 seed, but I could see 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11. None of those are great. Arguably you'd rather be an 11 seed. 7 seeds probably top, then 11 seed. It's just not a great place to be, but Oregon was an 11 seed last year. They won their first round game. They took Creighton to 2 overtime in their second round game. It can happen. You can make the Sweet 16 as 11 seed. It happens almost every year. This is an Oregon team that is capable of that. I don't think this is a Final Four team. Again, I think the star power is not there for Dana Altman and the Ducks. I'd be surprised if they were an Elite 8 team, but I wouldn't be shocked if they're a Sweet 16 team. I wouldn't be at all surprised if they're a round of 32 team. I think they're going to make the NCAA tournament. I think there's a pretty good chance they're in the round of 32. And I think it's totally fair or totally reasonable to believe that they'll be a Sweet 16 team. If they make the Elite 8, it would be surprising. It'd be a great season. If they make the Final Four, I would happily eat my words, but I'd be very surprised. I'd be very surprised. But I do think that this is a good Oregon roster. This is a good team put together by Dana Altman. They have the potential to be very exciting and very fun this year with 3 sophomores who I expect to all potentially have very big breakout years. At least 2 of them probably will. It depends on the health for Mookie Cook. It depends on what role Dana Altman wants for Evans and kind of how they play him alongside somebody like Brandon Angel or Supreme Cook, like what they're going to do with him in that front court. But I think there's a reality where this Oregon team is one of the most fun teams to watch in the Big Ten and one of the 4 or 5 best teams in the conference as well. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much, folks, for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We got more team preview stuff coming your way. My co-host Isaac Shade will be back with y'all on Wednesday and Thursday. He and I will be back on Friday doing some conference previews as well. We'll keep you up to date on conference realignment as that has reared its head once again here in the college space. We'll talk all about that coming up as well. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until next time, as always, peace out.